Alright, in this video we're going to still find the distance and midpoint of a line segment, but I'm not going to bother to graph. And the numbers aren't quite as small and convenient as the last example. So here I got 2 points, negative 43, 1.8, and negative 1, negative 13.5. So I'm still going to use the same strategy to find the distance. I'm still going to use the Pythagorean theorem, but I'm not going to bother to graph it because it's not really necessary. Because I can find the lengths of the two sides, the two legs of my right triangle, just by looking at the points. So if I look at the two points, my x-coordinates are negative 43 and negative 1. So all I need to do is find the distance from negative 43 to negative 1, and that would be the horizontal part of my triangle. Okay, so obviously the distance between negative 43 and negative 1 is going to be 42, because to find distance, you just subtract. Like you can take negative 1 minus negative 43 and you get 42. And just remember, distance is always positive, so make sure it's positive 42. Okay, now between the y-coordinates, I got 1.8 and 13.5. So what's the distance from 1.8 to 13.5? Well, you can just subtract again. So take 1.8 minus a negative 13.5. When you subtract a negative, just remember your basic rules. It turns into adding a positive. So negative 1.8 plus 13.5 simply becomes 15.3. Okay, so then to find my distance, I'm just going to do Pythagorean theorem with these two as the lengths of my legs. So I'm going to do the distance squared. You can use whatever variable you want to. I'm using d instead of c in this case just for distance, but equals 42 squared plus 15.3 squared. Okay, so I'd probably use a calculator for this part, so punch it in, 42 squared plus 15.3 squared, and I end up with d squared equals 1998.09. Now to find out what d actually is, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to square root my number here, and let's see, square root of 1998.09 becomes 44.7. So my distance is 44.7. Okay, now one thing I should point out that I don't think I pointed out in the last example is when you do square root things, you get a positive and a negative answer, but you ignore the negative one because since we're talking about a distance, the distance is always positive. Okay, so distance is 44.7. All right, now to find the midpoint, I'm going to use the same strategy I did before, which is I'm going to just find the average of the x-coordinates and the average of the y-coordinates. So for the average, you're going to add up the two x-coordinates and divide by 2. So I'm going to take negative 43 plus negative 1 divide by 2. And the average of the y-coordinates, 1.8 plus negative 13.5 divide by 2. Okay, so for the x-coordinates, negative 43 plus negative 1 is negative 44. Negative 44 divided by 2 is negative 22. So my x-coordinate will be negative 22. For my y-coordinates, I have got 1.8. Remember, I'm adding a negative, which is the same thing as subtracting, so it's really like 1.8 minus 13.5. So I end up with negative 11.7 divided by 2, and so I'm going to make that into, actually divide it, so I'm going to end up with negative 5.85 as my y-coordinate. So my midpoint is going to be negative 22 for my x-coordinate, negative 5.85 for my y-coordinate, and that would be the midpoint of my points, of my line segment here. So just remember, distance, use Pythagorean theorem, subtract the x-coordinates to find one distance, subtract the y coordinates to find the other distance, put them in the Pythagorean theorem. To find the midpoint, you just add up the x coordinates divided by 2, add up the y coordinates divided by 2, and you've got your coordinates.